A battery-powered flashlight may be something you never thought you needed in Fortnite Creative. Hopefully, after watching this video, I've changed your mind. Hey everyone, this is Syntax, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to make a battery-powered flashlight in Fortnite Creative. So yeah, let's just get into it. Now, before I get started, I just want to say there's actually quite a few complicated mechanics involved in this. I was surprised when making it to see actually how much goes into making this work, but if you do it all correctly, it's actually really cool, at least in my opinion, and especially cool for horror maps. So just stick around to the end to see if you like what I got going on. Now, of course, by battery-powered, I mean every so often you have to refill the flashlight with batteries, or it will cease to work, it will stop working, it will turn off, and you will not be able to turn it back on. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. It's just how to do that in Fortnite Creative. Now, if you weren't already aware, there is a flashlight in Fortnite Creative. It can be found under the weapons tab. It's the second thing, and you just turn it on and off and it works like a normal flashlight. The first and most important thing is your battery design. Now, there are a few that will work. The one I specifically went with actually involves a couple bottles of alcohol. If we go to the Wild West prop gallery over here, I actually grabbed this bottle right here. All I did was turn grid snap on to 32. I shrunk all of it down all the way and I placed it. Then I went back to my rotate, set it to pitch, and then clicked it 8 times and stacked them on top of each other, so you actually had something that looks kind of like that. Well, I guess it doesn't kind of look like that, it looks like that. And yeah, that's the design I went with my batteries. I'm just going to go ahead and move this button right here so you can see. As you can see, I have the batteries in clumps of 2 like that placed around the map. Well, for me it's just around this little enclosed area, but that is my design for all my batteries. They're just going to look like that, and I'll place them around the map. Again, it doesn't have to be the 2 bottles placed like that, but in my opinion that looked the best, so just go crazy with your design. Now, for the mechanics, you're going to need a series of buttons and triggers. You're also going to need a sequencer and a random number generator. You're also going to need a, well, you don't need a class designer, but I use a class designer. A class designer, an item granter, a mutator zone, and a damage zone. So if you got all that, just make sure you have all that in your inventory. The first thing I did was have a trigger that goes off at game start. So if we look at the settings right in here, you can see I have all this player stuff turned off. I have activate on game phase, game start. Now this can trigger an infinite amount of times. The delay is set to 1 second. Trigger sound and trigger visual effects are turned off. I have it visible in game, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And what this does is basically when triggered, it transmits on channel 1. Now what is this doing? This is activating our death timer, quote unquote, for our flashlight. So what this sequencer is this is how long our battery life is. This is how long our flashlight will stay alive. Now I'll get into more of the timing in a little bit, but I'm just showing you right now that the sequencer is what we're using to determine when our battery dies. Now, a good frame of reference for how long the time is if you set a tempo to 1 BPM and the length is just set to normal. This length right here is going to be 60 seconds long. So if you do, obviously if you set it to 2, this will be 2 minutes long. Set it to 3 minutes long. You get it. I just found it easiest because it's more space saving, if that makes sense. I don't have to make a super long sequencer. I can just have the tempo set to 1 BPM, and every length, so normal, 2, 3, 4, adds 60 seconds. So that's, just use that, it'll be easiest for you. For the rest of the settings, it's pretty simple. Your zone direction can be whatever you want. It just sends a pulse. Activate when paused, just have it set to no. I have damage level set to none, and this starts when receiving from 1. So as soon as the game starts, this trigger is going to activate. It's going to start this, and our timer for our dying flashlight will be started. So once you have your sequencer set up, this is actually where our buttons come into play with our batteries. If you didn't see before, I have buttons laying over the batteries, and I actually have a second set of buttons over here. As you can see, they're right there, and they have the button over them. But what this button is doing is actually resetting that timer. So if we look at the settings for the button right here, you can see that I just have delay set to none, time to trigger 1, because I just want you to be able to pick up the batteries once. Trigger sound, I have it turned off. You can have it turned on, doesn't really matter. Enable it on game start. Interaction text is just pick up. You can really have this be like recharge battery or recharge flashlight, whatever you want. I just have pick up because you're picking up the batteries. Turn the visibility off, set the interaction radius to 0.25, and this is sending a signal to channel 2. Now, this channel 2 sending signal is doing a lot of things. I'm just going to go over a couple of them right now because these are what's important for right now. But what that's doing is actually stopping this sequencer. So as soon as you pick up a battery, it's going to stop this. So even if you're at 59 seconds and it doesn't quite hit this trigger, it's going to stop this in its tracks. And what it's going to do is send another signal to this game start trigger that triggers when receiving from 2. So when I pick up those batteries, it sends a signal to the sequencer telling it to stop. It also sends a signal here and in 1 second it will send another signal to the sequencer back to start again. So again, it stops with 2, sends a signal to the trigger, which then sends a signal to 1, which starts it again. And you'll see it when I actually start the game, that even if it's right here, it gets reset back and then it goes again. Now you'll notice that at the end of this sequencer, I actually do have a trigger. Now this trigger is very important for what happens if your flashlight dies, and we're going to get into it right now. Go to the settings and have everything turned off except for triggered by sequencers, because we want this to be triggered by a sequencer. Have time tune trigger set to infinite, and delay and reset delay set to none. Of course, you can turn all this off. I have it visible in game so the sequencer can see it, because that's important. Enable it on game start, and when triggered, transmit on channel 3. Now this is doing a number of things. The first thing this is actually doing is granting the player a new flashlight, and this is because it forces you to turn your flashlight off. So even if your flashlight is turned on when you're in the room, it will shut off the flashlight and give you a new one, or give the illusion that you're shutting off the flashlight. It just grants you a new one just to guarantee that your flashlight will turn off, and I'll show you why in a sec. Basically, you want to have the on grant action, clear your inventory, grant the current item, grant on cycle yes. First item, have it equip in the first item. I guess if you have it second, it'll put in your second slot. So just set this to first item. Remove item on grant, say no, give extra ammo set to no, and of course this is granting when the sequencer hits this trigger, which is on channel 3. Now the thing disabling you from using your flashlight is also going to be activated when receiving from channel 3, and this is the mutator zone. As you can see, enable when receiving from channel 3. I'll get into the other stuff in a second, but this is enabled when receiving from channel 3. So you want to make sure you have allow weapon fire turned off. Nothing else really matters, but allowing weapon fire turns off means whatever shoot button you have to turn on that flashlight will no longer work. So as long as this is set to no, you should be fine, and just make sure it encompasses the area where your player is guaranteed to be, because obviously I'm just stuck in here, so it's a pretty small area. But if you have like a 20 by 20 building, you're going to want to make this a little bit bigger. Now you may have noticed that it's disabled, and on player leaving is transmitting on 2. If you remember, our batteries are actually sending a signal to 2, which is resetting the sequencer timer. It's also disabling this so we can use our flashlight again. So if our flashlight does die and we find batteries, this zone is going to get disabled so we can turn on our flashlight again. Now the last thing this trigger is actually doing is sending a signal to this random number generator, which is on a 30-second death timer. So this is the actual death timer. This is where you actually have to focus and find batteries really quickly. So your value limit is just 1 and 1. The winning value is obviously 0, because you don't want to have anything set up that the trigger cannot be activated. The length I just set so that it fits a trigger nicely. If we look at all the options, you can see the roll time is maxed out at 30 seconds. So once your flashlight dies, you have 30 seconds before you will actually die, and I'll explain why you'll die later. But you have 30 seconds until you die. Pick each number once, set to no. Reset delay doesn't really matter. Award score, just set that to never. And again, all this doesn't matter. Visible during games, yes, I'm just doing that so you guys can see it while I'm playing. Play audio, no, because I thought it was annoying. And obviously you can see activate when receiving from channel 3, which is that trigger at the end of the sequencer, and you can see it cancels when receiving from 2. So if our flashlight's dead and this is rolling for 30 seconds, if we do find batteries, which sends a signal on channel 2, it will deactivate the mutator zone, restart the sequencer, and stop this from spinning, so we actually won't die, which is, I guess, is important. Now, in the event that you cannot find batteries in 1 minute and 30 seconds, once this has finished rolling, it will actually do the same thing. It will send a signal to this trigger, which is actually transmitting on channel 4. This is set up exactly how that trigger is, so if you don't know how to set it up, just go back and see how I set up that trigger. But it's basically it's activated by sequencers, and what this does is sending a signal to channel 4, and this is activating our death zone. So you can see this gets enabled when receiving from channel 4. So if you fail to find batteries, and of course this is also encompassing the same area that our mutator zone is, but if you fail to find batteries, that random number generator is going to send a signal to this, killing the player, and I'll explain what this does in just a sec. Now, of course, I have the damage type set to elimination because you're gonna die. The damage tick rate doesn't matter because it's set to elimination. Of course, you want to have it affect players. That's a given. Make sure this is not enabled at game start. You don't want the player to die as soon as they spawn. You only want it to be enabled if both the timers run out. Now, what happens is on player entering a zone, it's transmitting on channel 5. Now, what the heck is that doing? Basically, I have this trigger up here that is set up exactly like the first one we went over, except it doesn't activate on game start. All this is turned off again. It's triggered infinite times, delay 1 second. Visible in game, I just did that just so you guys can see it. But you can see it triggers when receiving from 5. So as soon as I get into that damage zone, it's going to send a signal to this trigger, which is then sending a signal to 6. Now, what is that doing? Well, it's actually doing two things. What it's doing first is it's disabling this damage zone. So as soon as I die, a signal is sent to a trigger, which is sent back to this, disabling it. So when I respawn, I won't die to it again, which is super important. And the other thing it's doing is actually restarting the flashlight sequence. So as you can see, I have another trigger set up over here that actually triggers when receiving from 6. You can see it right there. And when triggered, transmit on 1. So it's actually going to restart this sequencer. So even when I die, I will restart and I will get this started again. Now, if you only have 1 life, you don't have to do that last part I just talked about, where you send a signal deactivating the damage zone and then send a signal resetting this, because if you only have 1 life, then you just die and the game ends. You have to restart. So that last part isn't actually necessary. But if you do want to give them more chances to get out, do that last part so that when you enter the zone, it sends a signal to a trigger deactivating the zone and simultaneously reactivates the sequencer. The last thing is the class designer. I just put a flashlight in here and had this class identifier set to 1, and equip granted item set to first, just because I want you to spawn with a flashlight. So if I actually pull up the island here, you can see that the default class identifier is 1. So when I spawn, it'll just give me a flashlight, but you just have to give them a flashlight somehow. It doesn't have to be like this. Okay, that was a lot of mechanics. If you followed along, congratulations, you have a working flashlight now. But I'm going to start the game and walk you through it again, just in game, just so you can see what's happening. I'll run through a couple scenarios just to make sure that you guys understand what is happening. So here we go. I've started the game. Now I turned off the light brightness just because I think it'll be more atmospheric. But I've started the game, and if you remember, that sends a signal to the trigger. That sends a signal to channel 1, and as you can see, there is our beautiful zone over there. It has started to move. Now that is moving, and once it reaches 60 seconds, it's going to activate that trigger. However, you can see that it's kind of moving along, inching along right there. So I am going to go pick up one of my battery packs, or not a battery pack, it's just the batteries. As you can see, they're right here on the table, and you can see that little interaction. I'll pick them up right there. You can see I pick them up, and if I go back and look at that timer, you will see that the timer has actually reset. So as you can see, it's actually close to the base again, and it is going back to that trigger. So it resets every time you pick up batteries. It's going to reset the timer if you set up everything correctly, and my flashlight still works. Now I'm actually going to let it run out so you guys can see what happens when it runs out. So as we draw near to our flashlight actually dying, you can see I have it turned on, and even if I have it turned on, if it reaches that, it's going to turn it off. So I'm running around with it turned off. It's about to die, so as soon as it dies, you're going to see that we are going to get granted a new flashlight, which is the illusion of it actually turning off. And as you can see, I'm spamming R2 right now, clicking the life out of it, and the flashlight does not work. Now our 30-second timer has been activated, so we need to go find new batteries really quickly, or else we will die in 30 seconds. So as you can see, my new batteries are over here. I'll go ahead and pick them up, and once I pick them up, I can actually use my flashlight again. So it's been activated again, and that death trap right there has been stopped, and as you can see, the sequencer has been started again. So here we go. I'm in a new game, and this time I'm going to actually show you what it's like when the flashlight dies and you are out of batteries. Unfortunately, the timer is going whether or not you have the flashlight turned on, so I guess it's just consuming power even if you never turn the flashlight on. You'd want to have your map really dark so that it would basically be required to have a flashlight, obviously darker than this, but yeah, it's going to be taking power whether you have it on or not, so just have it on the whole time. I mean, that really makes most sense. I don't know why you wouldn't have it on in a super dark map, but as you can see, there it is. So I'm actually going to go pick up both batteries right now and reset the timer. So boom, I'll pick up my batteries. And unfortunately, there is no way to get rid of the batteries. You could try an explosive device, but the pixel perfectness you would have to have on it is kind of ridiculous. So unfortunately, you have to remember how many batteries you picked up and where they are. But as you can see, I've now picked up both my batteries, and I have nothing to refresh my flashlight. Of course, the timer is reset again, and I can continue progressing through the map. But here's what happens when you when the timer actually reaches 30 seconds when it gets there. Again, just to recap, in words, I guess, the end of the sequencer is going to hit that trigger. It's going to transmit on channel 3, which is going to simultaneously grant me a new flashlight, start the random number generator 30-second timer, and activate the mutator zone so I can no longer use my flashlight. Now, once that is rolling, that 30-second timer has 30 seconds until it activates that trigger, which sends a signal on channel 4, which of course activates the death zone, killing me. And then of course the death zone, once I enter it, sends a signal turning off the dead zone and restarting the sequencer. As we can see, it's rounding out to a close, and as you can see, I can no longer use my flashlight. Again, spamming R2. You can hear that I'm spamming R2, and we have 30 seconds to find batteries. Unfortunately, I have already picked up these 2 batteries, so I cannot use these again. I would have to find other ones in my map to do so. Of course, you can hide it 15, 20, as many as you want. It depends on how big your map is, but I guess I'm just going to wait until I die here, and you guys can see what happens. should be in. Okay, there it is. So as you can see, I've now respawned. I can use my flashlight again. The damage barrier is deactivated and the timer has been reset. If I go look right here, there it is. So anyway, that is the working flashlight, or the battery powered flashlight in Fortnite Creative. So there you guys have it. That is how you make a battery powered flashlight in Fortnite Creative. I know these mechanics were probably way overcomplicated, and there is no reason to have mechanics like this in any map but a horror map. But if you are having a map that is centralized around you having a light source, because let's say there's a creature, some shadow creature in the dark that can kill you if your light source runs out, this is a super cool mechanic. Again, it's probably only applicable for horror maps, but you know me, I love my horror mechanics. So if you have a map oriented around keeping your flashlight alive, maybe make the timer 2-3 minutes long, because 1 minute isn't really fair, and just hide a few batteries around the map. Just make sure they're doing everything that I assign the jobs to do, because it's important that all your mechanics work if you're going to have a functioning map. Anyway guys, I hope this video helped you out, and yeah, this has been Syntax. Later.